Welcome, Pewter Report readers and listeners, to another edition of the Pewter Report podcast. I am John Ledyard. Joining me today on this show, which is energized by our friends over at Celsius, is the one and only Greg Auman. I said legendary on Twitter, and you said, I may not know what that word means. If you could pick one word to describe yourself, Greg, to be introduced as, what would you choose?
I need no adjectives at all. I appreciate it. It's very nice. Legendary, I'm just not there yet. That's all.
I don't know how many years you have
your icon out. Icon, too much.
Way too much. That was a little bit. Well, we're glad to have you on for sure, because we've got a lot to talk about. I mean, Bucs Falcons, obviously, it was a matchup that always draws the interest of a lot of Bucs fans, but more so than that, is this weird word, playoffs, that Bucs fans aren't quite used to, and that I'm sure. How long have you covered the team, Greg? And is this the first playoff run since you've?
Pretty much. I mean, I've been on since 13 full time, and like 16, They were there. I mean, 16, they were within a tiebreaker getting in, so it was there, but not like week 15 scenarios there by any means.
Okay, all right. So this is a little bit new territory for a lot of us. So I mean, it's been fun. It's been really enjoyable. But I think that there's still this kind of desire for, okay, what's more? How much can this team get done? Is the Super Bowl realistic? There's 7 teams getting the playoffs in the AFC and the NFC this year. So we'll cover all that ground. We'll also talk about the offseason and some of the pending free agents, lots of big name free agents, and it's all going to be brought to you by our good friends over at Celsius. Celsius energizes and powers lives every day. I've got my Celsius Heat. The jackfruit is the one that I'm trying right now. Scott, I don't think has even tried this one yet. Scott's has a new flavor, Greg, like literally every time we go in the air. I mean, I think the guy has tried like 50 flavors. It's crazy. Jackfruit is one of my favorites so far, I think. First of all, I got him in this a little bit of a bigger bottle, so there's a little bit more to it. These ones are 16 ounces, so I really have enjoyed it so far, though. I mean, I honestly, I feel like I'm kind of being a little bit cliche in saying this, but I really haven't had one that I dislike so far, and I know it feels like I'm supposed to say that, but I didn't really expect to like any of them, just because I don't drink pop, I don't drink energy drinks, I don't drink any of that kind of stuff, but no sugar in these. The fact that I can drink them and feel a boost of energy, but then also not feel like the bloated feeling that I get. That's why I don't drink soda at all. I hate that feeling. And these don't give me that at all, but they still taste great. And they accelerate metabolism, burn fat. They're great before my workouts. We have had tons of fans start drinking them and messaging us on Twitter about them and telling us their favorite flavors and what they're trying this week. It has been a blast to have Celsius as a sponsor of the Pewter Report podcast. We're pumped about them. And if you're interested, you can order them online, even if they're not in an area around you, or you can go look at Celsius.com and pull up the store locator and try to figure out where you can buy some of those Bucs fans. But they are really providing some great stuff, and they've been a ton of fun to have as a sponsor this season. So we've really, really enjoyed it. Greg, we've got a lot of ground to cover in this podcast. One of the things I wanted to ask you about to start is just what this season has been like for you. I am a first year covering the Bucs. I covered the Steelers for years in Pittsburgh, and coming to the Bucs, I have lots of thoughts and observations about how different it is and in a lot of different arenas. But I'm just curious to hear from you as somebody who's covered the Bucs for a long time. Has this year, other than obviously the COVID stuff has made this year different, but other than that kind of stuff, has this year felt different? Level of expectation, talent, has this year felt different? Has it been what you expected it to be on the field for the Bucs?
Yeah, different in like every aspect. It can be different, from the logistics of COVID and a million Zoom calls. And, Tom Brady's been here 9 months. We haven't really seen him in person, haven't got within 10 feet of him. There's no one-on-ones. There's no face-to-face. Same with Bruce. Like, again, it's all pretty much online and Zoom. So you picked the right year, and that you had so much of this year, you weren't even in state. Yep. And we're pretty much in position to do everything you want to do from here. So it worked out well for you that way. But away from COVID, just in terms of the team itself and the change there, I think there's so much more interest from casual football fans, from casual Bucs fans, relevance outside the market, like the radio hits. I think I do a lot of radio hits are all over. So like you'll be intrigued when you're doing one in like Auburn, Alabama, because there's 3 Tigers on the Bucs, or you'll get a call from Fargo or something. And with Brady this year, like it's all fair game. I'm doing a BBC hit tomorrow in England. I think I did like 3 Canadian affiliates in one week back in like September. So there's interest all over the world in anything that Tom Brady does and anything that Gronk does. And like I said, the level of relevance, and you see that too, just in terms of games. I mean, primetime games, Monday Night Football games. Just I wasn't aware before this year of like the sheer vitriol for the Joe Buck, Troy Aikman crew. And like you tweet out that those guys have the game, and it's like, oh, there's just all these people. And I really, because like no one really cared that much when Dick Stockton was calling the game. Yeah. So yeah, very much everything's different.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, coming from covering the Steelers, like that part of it, and I covered the NFL draft for years, right? So like it was kind of funny. Like I was like, okay, I'm covering the Bucs now. Like I'm not going to be on a lot of these like national shows or like shows in other markets anymore. And so like, and I have a lot of friends that, over the years I've been on a lot of those shows, doing radio spots and things like that. And then pretty soon it was like, hey, can you come on our show? And I'm like, what? You're like literally don't have anything to do with the Bucs. It's places in like you said, Alabama, like places like this that have nothing to do. And they're like, well, the Bucs are just a hot button team. Like we just want to talk about them and we want you. So I was like, so it was kind of cool because I still got to do a lot of those radio spots that I like to do. But you're right, like the national attention on the Bucs is probably bigger than it's ever been. I mean, even when they were in the Super Bowl, they won the Super Bowl years ago. Like, it didn't come with all this beforehand. There, it was a defensive team, and there were good players on offense. But and the media cycle these days, I mean, with social media and everything, it's just it's a totally different animal too. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been really interesting. You and I were kind of joking before, before that we went live about how different it's been. We're on these media calls, and we're always like a lot of times we have to wait, right? Like. They're like, oh, yeah, we're on at 1. And then somebody will come on and talk. Byron Leftwich today was on, and he's on for like 10 minutes. And then we wait like an hour for Todd Bowles. And sometimes it's 5 minutes, and we never really know going in. So we're constantly trying to find ways to like entertain ourselves. And part of that has been like this new COVID era. We're trying to like check out everybody's background, like that has their camera on, right? And see what's going on. And so you've been able to spot. I remember one of the first ones, you were like, I had a football behind me. It might still. Yeah, here it is right here.
Yeah, like who's that football again? Is it Rondé or something?
Hines Ward.
Hines Ward. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You got the helmets there. You got,
yeah. Yeah. You got a lot going on.
I have the most boring backdrop ever. This is just like the corner of my kitchen. This is like, there's not going to be spoiled milk behind me. My kids aren't going to run past naked. That's all that's important to me. There's so many people that have these amazing, all the ESPN people have these law library bookshelves behind them, and it's War and Peace over here and the full Tolkien collection over there. I don't have any of that. I just have this. Like I had like an A right here, which kind of looks like the athletic A, but it's just A because my last name's A.
I was going to say, I thought it was A for Auman. I never made
it's just A for Auman, but it's close to that weird script A the athletic has. So I figured it has like dual purposes, but now it's whatever the holiday thing is we replaced it with. So it's seasonal. But yeah, and it's like the lighting's terrible because there's always light coming through these windows where I'm kind of backlit.
Oh, lighting has been a trip. It's just so funny the things we have to think about like daily on this on our jobs that we never thought about before. Like,
don't eat on camera. That's my main. I forget because you're like I said, you're on, and we'll know that like Arians is at 1.
Yep.
But then it'll be like 2 hours of kind of just Zoom purgatory where you're like waiting for a player or a coach. And I'll go over and I'll do laundry over here, and I'll kind of hear something. Oh, Todd Bowles is on. You come over, you get the recorder, and okay, we're getting. But a lot of it, and it's like, all right, hold on, I'm going to eat some hummus. Hold on, Zoom. All right, stop video. It's like, all right, check my teeth. All right, I'm back on now. And then there's like 12 people that are watching you while you're doing this, but you don't want to sit there and.
Yeah, exactly right. And some people don't have the same awareness that you do, Greg, as we've learned the hard way this season. But it's been a lot of fun, but it is going to be, I think we're all going to just be pumped when we're back in the media room together. And
I hope we get everything back. That's the thing, is that it's like now that they've seen they don't have to do open locker room, now that they don't have to do guys on a podium, I hope that we don't just stay with this forever. I'm hoping that a year from now, even 2 years from now, it's kind of back to what we thought was normal back in the day.
Right. Yeah, that's the concern. I mean, I think everybody's kind of like, okay, what changes in terms of media access as things move forward? Because the NFL knows they can get away with a lot and not lose a lot of people's interest. And so, they want more team control over media stuff than ever before too. And so there's a lot that folks like us, we're not bemoaning. We love our jobs and we love our situations. Obviously, we know a lot of people would kill to be doing the kind of stuff that we're doing. But at the same time, like there is that challenge of trying to do our jobs to the best of our ability, knowing that not always are we getting the help that we would like during those times too. But I also want to talk about kind of what's in the future, not only for us in the media, but for the Bucs as well, Greg. I mean, we spend a lot of time on this show, obviously, during game weeks talking about the next game and just kind of having that singular focus. But I would like to talk about like the big picture for the Bucs right now. Like, I mean, first, we're going to talk about this offseason and the pending free agents and who you think the Bucs could bring back and all those kind of things. But one of the things that I really want to talk about is this Super Bowl window. Everyone's kind of saying, okay, we think the Bucs are a good team this year, but I don't think many Bucs fans would put a lot of money on them winning the Super Bowl. Part of the problem is the NFC, has a bunch of tough teams at the top. The Saints and the Rams who've already handled the Bucs. The Packers have been handled by the Bucs, but are formidable and playing better consistently well right now. And so, they kind of look at those teams and say, Seattle's got this juggernaut offense. Is this going to be the year? Is it going to take one more year? Obviously, we'll see. And first things first, getting to the playoffs is going to be the thing that really matters. But just curious, what do you see as the window on this team? Because this isn't your typical like older veteran team that has this short window. They just have an older quarterback. And so I wonder kind of if the window might be a little bit different than a lot of these teams like, for instance, the Steelers, who kind of are making a run of it now, it feels like, and this is kind of it for them. And then they'll obviously have to flip a huge page with a lot of their roster. So just curious what your thoughts are on this window for the Bucs and if it's as short as people seem to think it is.
Yeah, I tend to think, it's definitely this year and next year. I think everybody of note will be back. They can't afford to keep everybody back. It's just from a salary cap standpoint. But I think they can get by with most of these guys back next year. Like you said, it's a fairly young team. They've got decisions to make in terms of, you think about just the top like five. I think there's probably 5 guys on this team that are NFL top 50 free agents. So if they all want to get paid, they could lose a lot of them. Now, if a lot of them like what they had this year, and hopefully for them, there's some playoff component to it with Brady where you want to come back to be a part of that. So like Godwin and Shaq Barrett and Levante David and Ndamukong Suh, and then you get to Gronk and Antonio Brown and all these other guys that seem like secondary, but they're absolutely core people, especially as it relates to Brady. They can't keep them all. So you have to hope that there's some level of not necessarily like hometown discount, but just not needing to get the max offer you can get. Right. Some of these guys, I think at the start of last year, I think there were 2 Bucs that were 30 and older on the team, maybe 3. And that was it. And there's like 13 now. To where there's definitely going to be some guys that are on the way down the hill instead of up the hill. And you have to kind of be aware of that when you're doing contracts, because it's kind of like just because someone made something last year doesn't mean they're necessarily worth that this year. So I think they'll have to deal with that. And wherein this is a team that probably had to pay more in the past because they weren't winning and you had to pay enough to compete with the contender. Now they are. Now they have a winning record. They're all but assuredly a playoff team. Now that works in their favor. Now, if things are right, they shouldn't have to overpay to keep guys. They shouldn't have to overpay to bring guys in. There's going to be a whole nother wave of former Brady teammates that might be involved in coming here that probably aren't going to need to get paid a terrible amount to rejoin Tom Brady if the Patriots are a sub 500 team.
Right. I'm curious, as you mentioned, not being able to maybe bring everybody back and bringing back some guys that, like you said, they're going to be on kind of the downward slope, not the upward slope anymore. And that's something you absolutely have to think about as a general manager. It is not just about what a guy did this past season. It's about what you can realistically expect them to do in the future. Shaq Barrett, kind of a good example of that. And I'm just curious about what your thoughts are for him this season. Obviously, coming off a really good game, and he's really kind of picked things up the last few games, 8 sacks. I think he's pretty much a lock for another double-digit sack year, which obviously isn't leading the league in sacks like he did a year ago, but he's proven that he's a good player, and someone's going to pay Shaq Barrett a lot, especially at that position and in another draft where it doesn't look like there's a ton of great edge talent. So you have to weigh Shaq Barrett's cost at a premium position against Levante David and Chris Godwin's cost. Those are the 3 big names, right? You mentioned 5 guys who are going to be in the top 50. I'm assuming the others are probably Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski if they want to play. Right. Are those the 5 you're kind of thinking of?
Or Suh. Suh's probably in that. He's getting up there in age, but he's in that $6 to $8 million range probably.
Right. So focusing on those 3 big ones right now, if you're looking at those 3 and you're saying, I can bring back 2 of 3, and I think with the cap being lower, it's going to be hard. There could be a restructure of Donovan Smith, a restructure of Brian Jensen, moving on from one of those guys. How do you view kind of the situation with those three? And if you can only bring back two of Chris Godwin, Shaq Barrett, and Levante David, who would Greg Auman prioritize?
It's really hard, and you have to look at, it's not just who you are, like you said, it's who can they replace you with. And like I feel like you're way ahead of me in terms of mock drafts, but I feel like pass rusher is the absolute number one priority for this team. Yeah. First round, especially picking late 20s. There's good guys that I think are a good match for them in late first round as pass rushers, but you can't expect a pass rusher to come in and play 85% of the defensive snaps like a Shaq Barrett is playing right now, like JPP is playing. I think they have to address the position. But can you do that? I mean, if you're starting by letting Shaq go, he's like you said, he's going to get paid. I feel like I had no expectation of him coming close to 19 sacks this year. That was an amazing year last year, but he had like 9 before people even knew who he was.
Right.
So I feel like this year, Pro Football Focus just put out a tweet like yesterday or today, where he's second in the NFL in pressures. Mm-hmm. It's like TJ Watt and then him in the entire league. So he's still getting it done. It's just not resulting in sacks. And he's had a couple games this year where there was one game a month ago maybe where like the Bucs had 2 picks and he had the pressure on both picks. He didn't get the sacks, but he was absolutely the instigator in the turnover. So yeah, I think Shaq Barrett is here. I mean, Chris Godwin, again, they have so many receivers. It's hard to pay 2 receivers $15 million, but Chris Godwin is still ascending, is a hugely reliable player to where you'd think it's a franchise tag in the least. The franchise tag is kind of a good deal this year because the cap's going down, so it's a little cheaper. That would be a 1-year, keep Chris Godwin around for another year, and then you can decide, do you keep him? Do you trade him for picks? Do you keep him and trade Mike Evans? It's hard to pay 2 top-tier receivers, but when you got Tom Brady as a quarterback, you kind of want to maximize the guys he's throwing to. So it's really hard. Levante David, my question anytime talks about Levante David is, what do you pay him? What's his value? Because he's making $10 million a year right now, but if you look at the history of linebackers, inside linebackers, his age in the NFL, there's not a lot that keep playing at a high level. And this team certainly has a history of putting expiration dates on their defensive leaders when they hit a certain age. Yeah. And as unthinkable as it is to let Levante David go, we had a podcast 10, 12 years ago. Oh, there's no way they're letting Sapp go. There's no way they're letting Lynch go. There's no way, Brooks is going to get told he can't come back. They've done that with a lot of better players than David. So as absolutely central a leader he is and a core player in this defense is, there's going to be a dollar value where they say, sorry, I don't think you're worth that. And they got to figure that out. And they haven't always handled the high profile, iconic player exits very well. So you hope that Levante has earned the right to have things work out for him. I don't know what that number is. Like Spot Track does market values, and they have Levante's market value at like $13.4 million a year, which is a 30% raise from what he made in like age 26 to 30, which is like prime linebacker years. If he gets $13 million a year, I'm really happy for him. I don't know if that's going to be in Tampa if that's the case. So whether he's if he's a $10 million guy, I can see him staying here. If he's a $13 million a year guy, I don't know that this team will be committed to paying him that right now. Right. I don't know this, but it seems like a lot.
Yeah, you have to consider all that stuff because it's all part of the picture, right? I mean, this is not Levante David's age. He's going to be 31 in January. It's just one of those. It's just there's a reality with the position. Now, Levante David to me is one of the best 4 linebackers in the league. Like I've said that on the show. I think that he's awesome. But that goes to what you're saying. And even with Shaq Barrett, he's young enough that you can pay him in this window probably, but a 5-year deal might be pushing it. I mean, Shaq Barrett peaked later in his career, so maybe you think he's a little bit fresher, but the reality is age kind of tends to hit that position regardless. And so you have to think about all those things when you're offering this kind of money. Now, I will say one of the things with Levante David, I think Spot Rack could be on the high end of that projection just because the position kind of is one that has not always bumped up every year. Kind of like, our cornerbacks stalled out until this past offseason, right? Like they weren't going anywhere basically for a while.
That Revis deal was like the high mark for cornerbacks for like 6 years. Like nobody trumped it. It stayed at $16 million, and even your best guys were like 15. Now, of course, there's guys getting $20 million a year now, but for a long time, it was like the Bucs didn't realize they were going to set a record back in 2013, paying what they paid him.
It's just such a unique situation with Levante David because not many guys are going into a contract still playing at a high level, but also going to be 31 and also in the COVID era where the cap is going to be lower. And teams just probably may not be willing to shell out what they once were for a good, really good linebacker. And it could be a similar situation with Chris Godwin. Like Chris Godwin is hitting the market at a time where the wide receiver free agency is going to be unbelievable. And the draft is going to be unbelievable for like a third straight year at wide receiver. And so it's kind of like, is the market value for this guy? I mean, you look at some of the guys that got paid recently that are top end receivers in the league. Godwin isn't going to come close to that. I mean, he just isn't. He's not going to come close to 20 million a year like some of those other guys have gotten recently. And we think about Godwin in those terms because of how he played last season and how he's played when he's healthy this season. But he's not going to have 1,000 yards this season, and teams aren't going to pay 20 million a year for a guy with 1,000 yard season. So it might behoove him and the team for the franchise tag to be placed on him, right? I mean, don't you think that could be a realistic option this offseason?
And to me, if I looked at it right now, I would say that's where it starts. You keep Godwin for another year. I don't even know where like the Antonio Brown factor comes into this. If he came back, I don't know what he'd be willing to play for. He's definitely not a $2 million receiver, but he hasn't necessarily been 2018 Antonio Brown either. So yeah, Chris Godwin, if the franchise tag for receiver is like 1 year, $16 million, that gives you a lot of leverage. You got another year to try and negotiate with him. It's hard to keep him and Mike Evans both long-term making that much money. The only team in the NFL that's really paying two receivers that much is Cleveland with Landry and with Beckham. And there's just not a lot of models where that works. But again, if you have a pass-crazy offense and a quarterback at the end of his career who wants to have the best targets possible, maybe you do pay more than most teams do to have two elite top-tier receivers like they want to have with those two.
One of the reasons I think the Bucs were so excited about getting Tyler Johnson in this past draft, and Bruce Arians has kind of said this, is that they view him as being kind of like a Chris Godwin light type of player. And so like if you had to move on from him, it's kind of like, okay, Moneyball situation. Can we kind of replace him, what he does, with guys like Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson as a package kind of thing? But like you said, I think that what would behoove them most, especially with Brady maybe playing one more year, maybe two after this, we'll see what happens. But let's franchise tag him and then figure out down the road, after this next season, if he goes off and has 1,500 yards and he's, best receiver in the NFL again, then maybe he's like, all right, we have to make hard decisions and see if we want to keep two of these guys, or maybe he's priced himself out. You don't know. But I think you'd like to be able to keep him. It's a reasonable tag. You'd like to be able to keep him on the tag for a year and then develop Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson for another year. And if those guys take off and Godwin's still playing great, maybe you're like, you know what, buddy, you priced yourself out. Like, we love you to death, but we think we can replace you with a combination of these two guys, and obviously what Mike Evans brings to the table. You draft somebody else, you sign somebody else, but it might be something like that type of a situation. But I don't know about you, Greg. I cannot see them saying, all right, Chris Godwin, we're going to let you walk this offseason. When you listen to them talk about Chris Godwin, it just seems like they love him.
Oh, absolutely. And again, off the field, he and Mike both do everything you want. Yep. A receiver can be a really, really diva position, a really drama position, and it isn't. We don't realize how fortunate the Bucs are to have two guys who are as selfless and as team oriented. And I mean, Mike Evans is literally the team's man of the year. But you look, and it's like, look at receivers across the league. They all get traded. DeAndre Hopkins got traded for almost nothing. Amari Cooper got traded. Brandon Cooks has been traded like 3 times. So there's really talented receivers. And if you can get a 1 for him in like year 4, he's gone. And it's cold, but it's how the league operates. So it's like you tell fans that, and they're like, they can't imagine a world in which, the Bucs don't have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to throw to. It's a luxury to have 2 elite receivers like that. And you can't, if you keep them both and pay them both, it's at the expense of having even average level talent at other positions.
Yeah, and especially depth. I mean, you mentioned Antonio Brown, and Leonard Fournette is another name that we throw out there. Rob Gronkowski, I use the term depth. He'll be maybe the quote unquote starter, but OJ Howard obviously factors into that as well, and I'm sure they'd like him to factor in pretty heavily next season. But I say all that to say, okay, let's look at these 3 names. Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, and Leonard Fournette. I think Leonard Fournette's out of here, right? Like this is,
yeah. Once he was inactive in a crucial game in December, there's no way you'd even pay what you paid him this year to do that. And he'll want a bigger role. He won't want to be somebody's third down back. He's been a 1,000-yard rusher for 3 years. I don't think he'll get as much as he would have, if he had been a free agent this past offseason. But he can get a 1 or 2 year deal where some team will make him their primary back, and he'll have a chance to reestablish himself as a 1,000-yard bell cow running back.
God help that team. But yes, Leonard Fournette out here after this year. It might just be me, Greg, but I can't even take seriously an Antonio Brown. Like, I know when I said a couple weeks ago, there's just no way. Like, there's no chance Antonio Brown's back with this team. Like, this season was like, okay, we're signing you for 8 games, and we can literally cut you at any point. There's nothing guaranteed. But Antonio Brown's not taking nothing guaranteed. Like, you're going to sign him. You're going to guarantee that man money with a whole offseason between you and when he gets back on the field. There's no way you can do it, right? You can't trust him to that extent, right?
He didn't have a touchdown yet.
Yeah,
this is game 6 for him. He hasn't hit the end zone. He's barely averaged 10 yards a catch. So he's been I asked Byron today, and Byron said he's done everything asked. Normally, you'd ask a guy to do more than that with the credentials that Antonio Brown has. So if he's content with that, if he's okay being a number 3 possession type receiver, getting 5 catches for 44 yards and wants to be paid $2 million next year, bring him back. That doesn't sound like Antonio Brown to me. I think he's had the rehab aspect of this season for him, where he hasn't done anything completely insane in the last 6 weeks. Doesn't have any new unresolved legal problems to where, he's not as radioactive as he used to be. If he wants to go somewhere and get 2 years and $15 million from a team with the expectation of being a 1,000-yard receiver and an 8 touchdown receiver, he can kind of be that guy again. He hasn't really shown it with the Bucs, but he's got a lot of talented guys around him here too.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those situations where you can't, it's one thing to take a risk in the middle of the season when you're bringing Antonio Brown right onto the field and that's it. And you just have to have him locked in COVID era. He's not going anywhere anyway, you're hoping. And, it's just kind of like, okay, we can control this environment for a window of time that we think gives us the best chance to get to a Super Bowl, especially if something were to happen, God forbid, to Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. But long term, he might want more than 1 year deal. He might want a 2-year deal, and then you're going to guarantee him any amount of money. Like, I just don't think they can even be a consideration for Antonio Brown. Rob Gronkowski, on the other hand, is very interesting, Greg. I think he might be one of the most interesting free agent cases of the offseason. There are still a lot of teams, I think, that would like to have Rob Gronkowski. He still blocks. He still can play. There's no doubt about it. Production's been really good, even in an offense that spreads the ball around a ton. Like, this guy still has it. And, you could make the argument with how the tight end position has struggled in the league and how much teams covet that position that he could generate some buzz. But here's the thing. Does Rob Gronkowski want to play anywhere? Does he want to go somewhere else and play anywhere else? I don't think so, right?
That's the thing. No, yeah. Again, even if you have a good situation where you're like, Rob, this will be, here's 3 years, $35 million. Come, finish your career with a winning team.
Yeah.
It's not going to have Brady as a quarterback.
Right.
And that's probably where the conversation starts for him. Is Tom going there too? And then from a Bucs standpoint, you have that leverage of like, hey, we're the only team that has Tom Brady. So maybe you're not a $10 million tight end. Maybe you're a $6 million tight end.
Right.
It's one of those. So it's really tricky because in theory, you're not competing with anyone. As long as you have Brady as your quarterback.
And he loves Tampa, right? He loves Tampa.
Seems to like Tampa. I feel like this year, I don't know what your expectations were, but to see him having a Gronk spike in the end zone. Initially, the first couple of weeks, it was like, oh, I'm not sure what he has. He's got like 6 touchdowns now. He's done well. I would think both of them. It was funny because you went in and it was Brady was a 2-year deal. Gronk only had 1 year. I would think you expect him back, and I don't think he cost him nearly as much as he did this year to come back next year.
Right. Yeah, I think that same exact thing. I remember everybody's like, oh, they're not going to be able to pay Gronk $10 million. Well, they're not going to have to. Like, that's not what he's going to cost next year. It doesn't matter whether somebody else will offer Gronk more. I have no doubt about that. But I just, like you said, I think the Bucs have all the leverage, and that really matters in these situations. And I don't know if Gronk even cares about that. Like, he's not wired like everybody else in the league. Like, he just isn't, I think. Not at this point, it's true, at least. Like,
even if you had like a big market like Los Angeles or something where he'd be an absolute star, I don't think he knows how he's going to interact with Jared Goff or Justin Herbert or anybody new. He's had one guy for his entire career. He's a monogamous tight end, and you're asking him to, hey, come out, Minneapolis is beautiful this time of year. I don't think he's going to find out.
Right. I agree. Yeah. So I think it's a unique situation with him where he could be back. And I almost think the same thing about Ndamukong Suh. Ndamukong Suh is the second oldest defensive tackle to take a snap in the NFL this season. And Steve McClendon's the first, and they're both on the Bucs. Right. So I kind of look at Suh's situation and I say, man, here's a guy who's made a ton of money. He's made so much money, and off the field, he makes it. I mean, he outside of football, he's going to be so successful too, and he knows that. And so, to me, like the Sue situation comes down to like, is he done after this year? Does he just want to retire? I mean, Sue does not think like other players think, kind of like Gronk, but in totally different ways. Like Sue is, right. I mean, this guy is like peak intelligence in the NFL. Like he knows exactly what's going on off the field. He knows what smart decisions to make with his body. I mean, this guy is tuned in. This is a job for him. Like he puts in the hours every single day, a year round, to be able to be in this kind of shape. And so eventually, I think he could say like, oh, I'm done, or he could come back for one more year. This is our window. I see it as 2 year window, right. And I want to be back for that. I mean, is that kind of
the other thing with Sue is that he's got twins coming in March. That's the month he has to decide on free agency, and you become a dad with twins. That's a big part of your life. And it's like, do you want to be working? Because it's the amount of time you have to spend with your kids is radically different between retired and playing 85% of the snaps or whatever he plays for a defensive football team. So it's a big question mark. And I mean, I feel like his play has not dropped off. I mean, he's had sacks, he's had pressures. He's probably handled not having Vita Vea next to him as well as you could expect.
Yeah.
To where he's still playing at a high level. I don't think what I would tell you is that wherein before this year, I mean, he could have very well, he gets this rep as a mercenary where he's just going to go somewhere else, take another deal. I don't think he relocates and finishes his career somewhere else. I would think it's back with the Bucs or done. And I think those are the two things. And if the Bucs know that, again, maybe you don't have to pay him $6 million this year. Right. Maybe it's 4 or 5, and there's a little bit less, and that frees up a little bit more room for somebody else. Mm-hmm. But like I said, Sue's playing at a high level. He's got great things going on with the family coming up, where if he wants to go out on top with whatever the Bucs do this week, that wouldn't be anything bad for him either.
Right. Yeah, he's got a kind of a couple options in front of him, but like you said, I agree. It's kind of retirement, in my opinion, or back to the Bucs, and again, that gives the Bucs some leverage. So they have some leverage with some of the depth type of pieces. I love Sue. I think he's played really well this year. I don't think that you go into next year counting on Sue to be a major guy. I think the D-line, like you said, it's a priority in this year's draft and offseason. Like you've got to get better talent and more depth and younger talent, I think, in that group, especially with Pierre-Paul and McClendon and Sue, all those guys getting near the end, and even Golston getting up there in age too, as good a year as he's had. Right. I want to talk about cap casualties a little bit, guys who could potentially be either cut or maybe restructured or something like that this offseason. But a good question from our friends over at the Loose Cannons podcast. Big shout out to these guys. If you guys could choose one player on defense, who do you think would be a cap casualty but won't actually hurt the team in their run in 2021? Who would it be? This was a tough one for me as I saw it come up here in the comments section, and appreciate them for the super chat donation especially. But man, one player on defense, I can think of a bunch of names to talk about on offense, that could, and we'll talk about them in a second, guys like Ryan Jensen and Donovan Smith, and obviously one is Cameron Brate. But defensively, Greg, can you think of anybody who could be a cap casualty that won't hurt the team right now, that would really save them?
The guys that are expensive decisions are free agents, so you wouldn't even be cutting them. It'd be, do you re-sign Levante? Do you pay Sue to come back? Those types. I mean, Will Golston is under contract. I don't know that he's a $6 million player, but he's probably playing better in this defense than he had at a higher salary much earlier when they kept him. So I feel like Will Golston is undervalued.
They love him.
When you have the number one run defense in the NFL, he's probably your most prolific tackler against the run. Still gets to the quarterback. I think he has more quarterback hits than anyone on this team.
Especially this year.
Yeah. So like a year ago, he felt like someone who was legitimately on the bubble. Gosh, do they keep him? I think he's earned that now. I think he's back. Especially they have to guard against if Sue isn't there, Golston is now your veteran anchor on that line. He's the wiser guy who's going to help Vea be who he is in this league. I don't know if Steve McClendon, he might very well be done after this year, or if he's back, he's probably not very expensive that much. But there's not a ton of cheap cuts on defense right now. All the DBs are young on rookie contracts. If anything, you have to get ready to start paying those guys in a year or two.
Right. I mean, especially Carlton Davis. And, I looked at Jordan Whitehead just to see, but he's not making very much money. And so I don't know that there is. Yeah. Right. And Mike Edwards, same deal. And, Jordan Whitehead's really, I think he's been one of the biggest, like not many players on this team, what I'd say have surprised me. He's surprised me. I have not expected. He's played really well since the beginning of the season, where he had kind of some struggles And so hope that continues. Obviously, I think he's a player with a limited ceiling, but at the same time, been happy for him that he's had the type of season that he's had. Offensively, Greg, it might be a different story. We're talking about trying to bring back Lavonte David. Bruce Arians says the other day, Shaq Barrett's not going anywhere. Chris Godwin is clearly a player that they love and covet, and you could see at least maybe the tag for him. So what happens then? Could you bring back all three of these guys? I'm really not sure you could, even with the cap loan. It's going to be tight to bring back all three. Two, definitely. I don't think I think you could do two, and I think you might be able to keep Gronk on something cheap and Donovan Smith and Ryan Jensen, maybe some little restructure here or there, but I think you could do it. But the reality is right now, Ryan Jensen's supposed to make $10 million. Donovan Smith's making more than that, and both of them you can get out of their contracts. There's not the guaranteed money there.
Right.
What do they do? Like, what is the situation right now with those two this offseason? Who do you even – I know everybody thinks Jensen's the better player, but Donovan Smith plays the more valuable position. Do you want to move out Brady's left tackle in maybe the last year of his career? And so there's just a lot to consider with those two.
Right. I mean, the first thing with Donovan has to be they love Tristan Wirfs. So the worst thing working against Donovan Smith is that he's not even the best tackle on his team right now. So if they decide they think Tristan Wirfs can be a left tackle, now all they have to do is buy a right tackle. You have to find a right tackle, which is a lot easier. Wirfs is inexpensive for 3 more years. So that's a huge cap savings. So unfortunately for Donovan, it's just, I mean, he has to justify not being on the team, but being on the team at $14 million. So if you're strapped for cash as they look to be, that seems like an area where they can move Wirfs over, find a right tackle, and your right tackle could be a second-round pick. It could be a mid-range free agent they have that has ties to their coaches or something like that.
It won't be Joe Haig.
Won't be Joe Haig. Probably won't be Josh Wells. But they could go out and get somebody. Again, Jensen. I feel like Jensen has had a bond with Brady, has been a leader on this team, but he's making $10 million. So if the Patriots center is available and a good deal less expensive than Jensen is, and you feel like he still plays at a high level, that's a position where you could save some money. It's not that Jensen isn't bad, it's that he's expensive, and it's hard to justify being a $10 million player if they have bigger needs and other players that they value more than Jensen. So I felt like this offensive line was just a critical year because they had to play well to justify staying together, and they have. I mean, they've given up 16 sacks in 13 games. They've absolutely protected Brady the way you need to protect a 43-year-old quarterback. But I think just the circumstances of COVID lowering the cap, of them having so many decisions to make, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I'd be surprised if both those guys are back. I will say that.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it, especially if I just believe at the end of the day, when you stack up those five, I think at the end of the day, Chris Godwin and Shaq Barrett are bigger priorities in the minds of the Bucs, and I think they'd really want to have Lavonte David back. I think it would be hard, like you said, hasn't always gone the way they wanted to with those long-term guys. And I'm not saying he's as likely to be back as Godwin or Shaq Barrett, maybe even at this point after what Aaron's was saying about him the other day. But at the same time, I think it's something that when you look at that, I know they like Donovan Smith too. They like all these guys, but the reality is you can't keep everybody. And if you're trying to bring back those three and pay them what you need to pay them and maybe get some depth, at D line and bring Gronk back, somebody's got to go. And so it's going to be a hard situation, I think. And you and I know this, Greg, moving a guy from right tackle to left tackle sounds great in theory, but it is not that easy, is it?
It's not a given. That's the thing. It's not a given. And Wirfs has done amazingly well in this spot, but we don't know how he'd handle that. We don't know. And I mean, I don't think that left and right are the two completely separate worlds they were 5-10 years ago. They're really good right tackles now that are better than the left tackles. But in this circumstance, to see the upside you have with Wirfs, where literally you're talking about him as, his Goodwin's talking about him being an all-pro yesterday, not just a Pro Bowl, but one of the best 2 right tackles in the league. You want to take advantage of that, and you want to put him in the biggest position possible. And unfortunately, what you have on the left side is someone who's getting paid like a top 5 or top 10 tackle and probably isn't playing at that level right now. So whether they move on entirely, you mentioned trying to restructure things. I think it's probably more likely they move on than to try and ask him to take a pay cut and take a lesser role. So it's tricky. Like I said, there are major decisions, and it's a different decision if you're coming off like a trip to the NFC Championship game versus one and done in the playoffs. We don't know how much – if they make a good playoff run, they might want to keep everything together and might do things in spending they don't normally do to facilitate that. If they don't, they might be more willing to tweak things and change things. A lot of that will just hinge on how they do in the next, 5 weeks.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's one of those situations where you have to weigh a lot of different things. And then it's also like, what do you need and what could you get to replace them? Like you said, I mean, if you can get a center for cheap, that's an easier position to replace typically than left tackle. Just the reality. I mean, if you want to replace a left tackle, you usually and you want a good player, that's proven, you have to pay that guy maybe. And, you mentioned the switching from left tackle to right tackle and not being as hard on the left side. I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think that's kind of a myth that playing left tackle is harder than playing right tackle. My biggest question mark is, can he handle that kind of a move? Not because it's harder to play over there, but because it's just different. His best position in college was also right. He played left a little bit, Wirfs did early in his career at Iowa, and wasn't as good. I mean, I was early, so I mean, who knows? Yeah. But and then he went to right tackle and was much, much better and has developed there. So you switch him. You want to move a guy that's played that well, and mess with things a little bit. So there's a lot of question marks, I think, in a call like that one. But
absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that they've got to kind of juggle a lot of those things this offseason. Another one of those things they've got to juggle, Greg, is Cam Brate. I know everybody loves him and everybody in the media loves him. I mean, Cam Brate's such an easy guy to like, and he is just such a great way about him. He took a pay cut this season to stay with the team, but reality is, I mean, he's due to make, I think, $6 million or so next year, and he's not. I mean, it's not even close. Like, right? I mean, they're hoping Gronk takes less than that for next year, I'm sure, if they want to bring him back. So really looks like Cam Brate's going to kind of be a cap casualty, right? Do you see any way? I mean, he would have to restructure again for way less money, I think.
I mean, if you had a team that had a lot of cap, you could try and trade him, but I don't know that he gets $6 million a year right now in free agency if he went on the open market. Cam's, I think very highly of Cam Brate in terms of just high character, reliable. He's got 30 touchdowns. He's got pretty much the second best tight end in Bucs history. Right. And again, but you can't have 3 tight ends making $6 million a year. Nobody in the league has that. So I would think if he wanted to stay, if he wants to win with Brady the same way he did this year, he can probably take a similar pay cut. I mean, it's that number that he's due to make this year. I think he probably knows that's not anything close to guaranteed. So if he came back for $4 million or for $3 million, that might be a good use of getting him for less. But I don't think he's likely to be back on the contract he has right now. To some extent. I mean, again, O.J. Howard got hurt. Gronkowski certainly has a history of injury. So you could keep a third tight end the same way you bring in Antonio Brown to guard against injury. But I don't know that'll be the plan in the offseason as tight as things are from a cap standpoint.
That's exactly right. I just, to me, I think you'd have to offer him, very little. My $3 million might be the most, in my opinion, for the Bucs. And I think he might get a little more elsewhere, but he probably doesn't get 6 elsewhere. So how hard is it to trade him this offseason? If you wanted to trade him, the window to trade him might have been in the season where a team could use him as a rental and pay him very little in the season and then move on from him after the season, and he'd be able to find his new team. So I'm not, love to see him try and trade him if they can and get something, even a 6th, 7th or whatever for him. But reality is, it seems, unlikely. It seems like he might be one of those guys that is kind of a cap casualty this offseason, as much as everyone likes him, and you roll with OJ and Auclair and hopefully Gronkowski back next season. And so a lot to consider for sure. A good question by Greg DeCruz, who always asks some good ones, and appreciate the super chat donation very much, Greg. Which coach could leave next year? Some key position coaches could get coordinator jobs. Let's start with a coordinator. Let's start with 2 coordinators, Byron Leftwich, Todd Bowles. What do you think, Greg? I mean, do you think these guys, their names have been thrown around? Obviously, Bowles has been a head coach before, and his name probably will continue to get thrown around as long as he remains with the Bucs. You think this is the year for him? There's a lot of hot names out there in the coaching market. It seems very competitive this offseason, not a ton of openings. Do you expect Todd Bowles, Byron Leftwich, maybe a couple years away still? I don't know. We'll see. Do you expect those guys to get some interviews, maybe some consideration, maybe even a job offer this offseason?
No, I do think they both can. And some of it, again, hinges on what this team does. If they win out, if they win 2 playoff games, they could both be gone. Mm-hmm. If they go 9-7 and lose on the road in the first round of the playoffs, probably both back. I mean, I think some of it is just how hot a commodity your team is. I mean, Todd Bowles is very much a known commodity, as a coordinator is proven. Probably, I think everyone that sees what happened with him and the Jets knows, didn't have a great situation to go into or come out of there. Byron Leftwich, again, I mean, as a guy who's a play caller, very young, will come with good recommendations all over the league because of who he is. So, I mean, I would not be surprised. I don't think they're probably the 2 hottest names, but if this is an offseason where there's 5 or 6 hires, they'll be right there. And then the question is, if they leave, do the assistants, go with them? Does a guy like Larry Foote become your coordinator, or does he go with Bowles as his defensive coordinator somewhere? It complicates things when you lose someone, because then your assistants are competing between two coaches they love working with. So, again, the more success they have, the more risk they have of losing the people that would be there for another run in 21, unfortunately.
Right. And you mentioned Larry Foote. Harold Goodwin has been kind of a guy that's assistant head coach here, run game coordinator. He's a guy that's clearly has leadership abilities that teams might be looking for in a role like that. Again, I don't think anyone expects him maybe to be a head coach, but is there a coordinator job? Is there a job that offers him to kind of the next step up the ladder to being maybe a head coaching candidate at some point in time? And Larry Foote, guy that's really highly thought of, and maybe kind of a rising star in this business. And so, there's some options I think that these guys could have potentially some other spots after this season. But as it stands, I don't know that I would say that anybody is like you have a situation like the Rams. Brandon Staley was all over the news today. Like he's going to get interviews. You know what I mean? Like, not even surprised. First year as a DC, but they probably have the best defense in the league. And look at all the stuff that they're doing. I mean, that guy's on the cutting edge of it. I don't know if anybody sees these guys with the Bucs as like, we got to have these guys like before they're, but I mean, like it was like that for a while with all the Sean McVay guys. Like, we got to get Matt LaFleur. I don't care how old he is. We got to get now. Like, we got to get, Zach Taylor now, like while they're young, because they're the next big thing. And I don't know if anybody on the Bucs is seen that way, right? I mean, it's more of these guys may be options if we miss out on our top options at the position. It might be.
It feels that way. Yeah, it feels that way. Like when they were 6-2, there was such a buzz around this team, like, oh, they're going to lose multiple coordinators. They're probably,
after the Packers game.
Yeah, after the Packers game, after the Raiders game, they're winning, beating everybody by 20 points. It seemed that way. And again, they could get back to that. If they win these last three and they go to, I don't even know where they go right now. They go to LA or they go to Green Bay and they get a playoff win. That will validate all the success they've had right there. And Bowles, like I said, Bowles is well respected across the league, where that wouldn't surprise me. Leftwich is an absolute up and comer. As young as he is, to be a play caller on that side of the ball, that's where the hot hires come, is on the offensive side probably. So, like you said, it's probably not the same buzz that Brandon Staley has with the Rams or some of the other guys that are on red hot teams right now. Just because, the Bucs had lost 3 of 4 5 days ago. So that can change in a hurry, I would say.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's recency bias is a very, very real thing. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And so something that even teams have to kind of work against it at some point in time. Greg, we're wrapping up here. Last question I have for you is Bucs Falcons. You've seen this matchup a lot over the years. The Bucs have probably rarely been as heavily favored as they'll be in this matchup against the Falcons. But we also know the Falcons are a good team. I mean, they are a tough team. They've been in every game. They're not like your typical 4-9 football team. And so how do you see this matchup, and maybe even throw a prediction our way for the fans that are tracking that kind of thing?
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the Vikings game did last week. It's on the road, which is different. The Falcons are a team that's like the Vikings, where they've had great games. They have other games that they were either fortunate to win or barely lost, where they're kind of right there. Their defense gives up a ton, especially in the air. And that's probably what starts for me, is that this is a team they should be able to throw for a lot of yards against. Right. Especially, there's question marks on the Bucs side that are completely random question marks, where they might not have a kicker, punter, or snapper on Sunday. And we just saw with the Vikings what can happen when you just don't get any points from special teams. So that can be the big equalizer. But I do think they've kind of got some things in place where they're not going to be completely Broncos at quarterback here on Sunday in terms of how they deal with what they're missing. But, Ronald Jones, if Ronald Jones isn't there, they're now given 40 snaps to a guy who was a healthy scratch 5 days ago. So that's a weird situation to be in. We joke about Leonard Fournette. He could have like 120 and 2 touchdowns on Sunday. And we'd be like, yeah. So right now, I feel like I'm very confident in the Bucs' ability to score against this Falcons team. I've seen Julio go for like 253 in that building against the Bucs defense. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to discount Matt Ryan's ability to answer that. Right now, it feels like a higher scoring game. It feels a lot like the Vikings did going in last week, where they have some really dangerous offensive weapons. If Julio's healthy, he and Ridley can be every bit the threat that Thielen and Jefferson were. I thought the Bucs did a really good job of containing those two and not giving up any big plays Sunday. They also could not, under any circumstances, get off the field. So you don't want to have another game where you give up 40 minutes in time of possession, even if the Falcons don't have Gurley and are kind of behind at running back. So right now it feels like if I'm making a pick right now, it's like 35-24 Bucs, something like that, where they win and they score a lot of points and they cover and they pretty much all but clinch a playoff berth on Sunday.
Right. I'll run through the injury report really quick and then we'll get out of here. Jamel Dean was a limited participant yesterday, but full participant today. Levante David, Rob Gronkowski, Steve McClendon, and Donovan Smith all not participating, but all not injury-related issues. Jason Pierre-Paul, limited participant like he always is, and Joe Haig was back at a full participation. So things trending in the right direction for the Bucs injury list. For the Falcons, things trending in the wrong direction. Ricardo Allen did not participate again in practice for the second straight day with a concussion. So tomorrow, huge day for him, obviously. James Carpenter, their guard, is still limited participant 2 days in a row. Marlon Davidson, the rookie defensive tackle, they'd love to see out on the field, limited yesterday, did not participate today, so he's moving in the wrong direction. Quadriceps injury for Darquez Denard. He did not participate either of the last two practices, yesterday or today. He's a guy that's a really critical kind of piece for a really young secondary. He's one of the only veteran guys. And Grady Jarrett was added to the injury report today with a groin injury, limited participant in practice. Julio Jones again did not participate today, so 2 days in a row for Julio. Alex Mack, not injury-related. He didn't participate, just a veteran day for him. Caleb McGarry for the second straight day did not practice, not injury-related either. Steven Means, their pass rusher specialist, was a limited participant for the second straight day. So was Calvin Ridley, a limited participant again with a foot injury. So a lot of injuries for these guys.
It's like 12 guys.
I know, and a lot of those guys are starters. Michael Walker, the one player did trend in the right direction. They're kind of coverage nickel linebacker, a rookie for them. He went from a limited participant to a full participant with a shoulder injury. So he's one of the guys moving in the right direction. And their fullback, Keith Smith, same thing, limited to full. But there's a lot of key guys. I mean, tomorrow's a huge day for Atlanta to maybe see what's going on with a lot of those guys. Ricardo Allen and Julio Jones probably among the most notable. Caleb McGarry to see what those guys' status is. And you mentioned Gurley too. So there's kind of a lot up in the air with the Falcons right now in terms of what happens. So we'll examine things next or tomorrow, I guess.
Yeah, even if you count all the Bucs COVID guys, I think the Falcons are in worse shape right now in terms of just uncertainty and key people on both sides of the ball.
Yeah,
not there. And again, like yesterday, you saw those numbers and you're like, well, maybe it's a Wednesday. Maybe they're just trying to give guys rest. If they're still out today, that's problematic for sure.
Right, for sure, absolutely. As one Thursday practice is kind of one that kind of tends to dictate where things are trending. But we all know this. It's not a Bucs season without some kicker drama, Greg Auman. You know that full well, and we've got some. It looks like if Ryan Succop is indeed going to be out this Sunday. So there will be some drama at the very least. Maybe Greg Joseph cashes in. Like I said, he made all 7 of his extra points last year. He's the guy that has a limited but good resume in the NFL. And so you hope that he can get up there and take care of business. Greg, thank you so much for joining, man. I appreciate you giving us some time and tons of insight. Really valuable for us and the fans. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. We'll have to do it again. If we're still talking football in January, we'll do it again for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the next time already. Appreciate all you Bucs fans. Remember, we'll be back Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. We'll be live. We'll break down Bucs Falcons, and we'll talk about all that game and all the details, everything you need to know. Appreciate y'all listening. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of the Pewter Report podcast. Out.